turning back, no turning back.
Okay, the book of Joshua that we're looking at this morning is the end of the saga of the passage of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt to the Promised Land. It was a long journey and had many twists and turns. Starting out from Egypt with the parting of the Red Sea, recounted at the start of the book of Exodus, continuing to Mount Sinai and the giving of the law, including the Ten Commandments, and then to the brink of the Promised Land. But they were not to enter the land. They sent spies into the land to get a report, and the report was that although the land was very fertile, they brought back grapes, pomegranates, figs, but also that the inhabitants were very big and very strong with heavily fortified cities. The Israelites were discouraged and afraid and rebelled against God, and as a result, the nation of Israel then spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness until they came back to the Jordan River and the edge of the Promised Land again. Moses' final instructions to the nation on the brink of the Promised Land are at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, but he was not in any condition to lead the people in. In fact, he was near death, and he passed the leadership to Joshua before dying and being buried in Moab. And so the book of Joshua begins with the installation of Joshua as Moses' successor to lead the people of Israel into the Promised Land. It has broadly two parts. The first part is a record of battles and territory won. Here you'll find the story of Rahab and the spies, the Battle of Jericho, the story of the sun standing still, among other stories. The second part of the book is an account of the land divisions and the settling of the 12 tribes. And the book of Joshua culminates in Joshua's final instructions to the people, much as Moses gave his final instructions to the people at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. In both cases, the nation stood on the brink of change. In the case of Moses, it was the first time that the Israelites would enter the Promised Land. And for Joshua, it was a change from a war stance to a peace stance. At this critical time in Israel's history, Joshua called on the people to reaffirm their covenant with the Lord. The passage that we read has this sort of fascinating to and fro, starting with Joshua's, well, whatever you do, I'm going to serve the Lord along with my family. And continuing with Joshua almost taunting the rest of the nation that you aren't up to this. And the people responding, yes, we are. We will serve the Lord. No, you can't. Yes, we can. No, you can't. Yes, we can. And finally, Joshua says, okay, but here's a marker to remind you of what you said. And he erects a stone at Shechem as a permanent reminder of the people's promise. The sad thing is that Joshua was at least in part right. No, you can't. Did characterize the Israelite nation. With some notable exceptions, eventually God's judgment did fall upon them. You can read the rest of the Old Testament if you want to follow that thought along. This morning, I want us to consider that every day we have a choice about whether we will serve the Lord or not. Most of the time, life muddles along, and one day looks pretty much like another, but sometimes there are choke points or decision points in our lives when things do change radically. It might be a change of job. It might be an accident or illness, or the death of a parent or sibling. In my case, I went to college, I got married, I changed countries, I changed jobs, I had a heart attack, and so on. And each of these has been a choke point. How do I move forward with my life? Particularly, how do I move forward with my Christian life? Sometimes these changes go smoothly, and our commitment to the Lord, to Christ, remains front and center, and sometimes it gets shoved to the back and forgotten. If we recognize the challenge, we can rise to it. If we fail to recognize the challenge, we may fall, just like the Israelites did on many occasions. Let's look again at the nation of Israel. They were moving from a war footing to a peace footing. At the beginning of the book of Joshua, Joshua's instructions are about a war. Joshua chapter 1, verse 14. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that the Lord gave you east of Jordan, but all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest. At the end of the book, there is a peaceful regime. Joshua 24:28. And Joshua dismissed the people, each to their own inheritance. It's a strange thing that Christianity grows stronger in adversity and weaker in rest and plenty. It is well said that there are no atheists in foxholes. And even when there isn't a bullets and bombs war in progress, the Christian church is stronger in adversity than it is in affluence. We may not like the military theme of onward Christian soldiers marching as to war with the cross of Jesus going on before, and like a mighty army moves the church of God. Brothers, we are treading where the saints have trod. We are not divided, all one body we, one in faith and spirit, one eternally. But it beats the other version. Like a mighty tortoise moves the church of God. Brothers, we are treading where we've always trod. We are all divided, many bodies we, strong on basic doctrine, but weak in charity. The church is stronger when it has a strong sense of purpose, and one way that can show up is when it is enduring hard times or even under attack. And so it was with the Israelites. When they were under pressure, they came through. Think the Battle of Jericho. And when the pressure came off, they messed up. God sent the prophets to try and get them to shape up, but with very limited success. Listen to Amos. Prophet Amos, chapter 2. This is what the Lord says. For 3 sins of Israel, even for 4 I will not relent. They sell the innocent for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample on the heads of the poor as on the dust of the ground and deny justice to the oppressed. Father and son use the same girl and so profane my holy name. They lie down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. In the house of their God, they drink wine taken as fines. Or how about Isaiah at his most sarcastic? Isaiah chapter 5. Woe to those who ride early in the morning to run after their drinks, who stay up late at night until they are inflamed with wine. They have harps and lyres at their banquets, pipes and timbrels and wine, but they have no regard for the deeds of the Lord, no respect for the work of his hands. And further down in that chapter, woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine and champions at mixing drinks, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deny justice to the innocent. The result of this neglect of the Lord was exile for hundreds of years. And the full story of that will have to wait for another day. So what's this got to do with us some thousands of years later? Well, not to put too fine a point on it, we're just like the Israelites. We are fallen human beings with the same tendencies they had. I was directed to a recent report from the Pew Research Center entitled The Age Gap in Religion Around the World. You can find it on the web if you want to follow this up. The reason I bring it up is because it shows how much this tendency is still with us. Here's a quote from the report. As the theory goes, in places where people face a constant threat of premature death due to hunger, war, or disease, feelings of vulnerability tend to drive people to religion, which in turn provides hope and reduces anxiety. In countries with advanced economies, meanwhile, people are more likely to feel safe, in part because technology and infrastructure investments in these societies have helped people overcome many common health problems, cope with severe weather, and deal with other kinds of emergencies that can cause existential anxiety. Norris and Inglehart contend that people in these countries rely less on religion for emotional support and for explanations of the unknown. When new cohorts of adults grow up in societies with greater existential security than their parents had, as may be the case in a country with improving economic conditions, young adults may drift away from religion, producing the age differences described in this report. By the same token, a decline in existential security within a country that falls into civil war or some other calamity can help explain some of the exceptions, places where young adults are more religious than their elders. And indeed, the data assembled by the Pew Foundation supports the theory. Weekly worship attendance is most common where life is shortest. Religious commitment is lower in countries with higher education, higher GDP, and higher income equality. In countries where people attend school longer, they go to church less often. And the report has graphs and numbers to support that, but this isn't a lecture on religious statistics. The evidence is clear from the Old Testament to the present day. We come to God when the pressure is on, and we fall away when the pressure is off. And this is my main point this morning, when things change is a critical point where we need to reaffirm our allegiance to Christ, examine the foundations of our faith, and if necessary, patch them up, or we will fall just like the Israelites. And I want to expand on the issue of decision points this morning in 3 areas. My first message is to now, how am I going to put this? The mature members of the congregation, or more simply, the older people here. Now, I have to consider myself in this group as I now qualify for senior citizen discounts, but the truth is that I'm still a teenager. I've just got 50 years of experience. I think that some of the largest dangers to our Christian faith at this stage are discouragement and complacency. And when we reach a decision point, we may frankly be unable to rise to the occasion. As we get older, it's easy to become discouraged. I don't know who it was who first declared that the world was going to the dogs, but there are certainly quotes from the ancient Greeks that it was so, and that the younger generations are not up to the standard of the previous ones. How about this sample from one Hesiod in the 8th century before Christ? I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on frivolous youth of today, but certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. When I was young, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of elders, but the present youth are exceedingly wise and impatient of restraint. Last week, Graham took us through Hebrews 9 and 10, and I was struck by the verses in Hebrews 10, verse 23 to 25. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we can spur one. The context is needle, okay? How one may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And that led me to Galatians 6, verse 9. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Do we become weary of doing good? Have we been doing good all our lives and wondering whether it was all worth it? Can we stand all this uncertainty and change in the world? It's easy to be discouraged, isn't it? But although we look around and realize that things are not the way they were, we must also realize that things change and be glad for that change. For example, if it were not for the advance of medical science, many of us, including me, would not be here this morning. We'd be dead, which would have some advantage for us Christians, but not for our loved ones. Yes, there are issues facing this world, and if we allow ourselves to be discouraged by them, then we will fail, just as the Israelites failed when they saw the giants in the land and got scared. But there are also great opportunities, both for ourselves, our children, and most importantly, for the good news of Jesus Christ. Each generation must tackle the problems in front of it with the tools available. It's also easy to become complacent. We organize our lives in a certain way with certain expectations, and we generally aim to keep things that way. We do not like being disturbed, and disruptions are regarded mostly as a threat. I've noticed in my own life that I've become less flexible and less accommodating as I get older. Am I crimping God's plans by being too attached to the way things have always been and not open to new possibilities? I am reminded of a member of my previous church who complained that he wanted to take his children to all sorts of new restaurants, but they only wanted to go to McDonald's. Are we settling for the familiar and the safe when God has something new and greater to show us? So how do we stand when the decision points come? Each generation for itself must decide whether to serve the Lord or not. So if we older people stand at the junction between the past and the future, what should we do to ensure that God's kingdom flourishes? How do we serve the Lord in this situation? Well, the answer's in the passage, and it seems almost trite. Verse 14, "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord." Or if you want Jesus' version of that, in Mark chapter 12, one of the teachers of the law heard him debating. Notice that Jesus had given a good answer. He asked him, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," answered Jesus, "is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." All together now, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength." And I haven't forgotten verse 31 either. "And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." Sounds pretty simple in theory. It's just the practice that gets difficult. And when we reach one of life's decision points, we must decide, as those Israelites had to, are we going to go on serving the Lord or not? My second point this morning is for the young people. So please put away the smartphones and listen up. And this point has more than 130 characters. You may have already faced some decision points in your lives, but there are more to come. Some of you are changing schools. Some are going to college, and some are moving up a year in college. Where will I continue my education? What career will I choose? Who will my life partner be? Where will I live? These are decisions that are coming to you, and each one of these can be a decision point when you will either stand firm in your faith in Christ or fall. I know because I've been there. Let me tell you a personal story. I was brought up in the Baptist tradition in a church that in its time was probably not much different from West End in those days. Our services in those days were hymn sandwiches. You can still see the boards there on the side. With organ accompaniment. And if someone had shown up with a guitar, there would have been a revolt. Did I mention that older people are resistant to change? We had a youth group, and I was a member of a church organization called the Boys Brigade. Did you have Boys Brigade in Canada? Oh, someone can remember. Yeah, okay. My parents were active in the church, and so on. I was one of the young people. And at the age of 18, I went to college, to Jesus College, Oxford, to be precise. And in early October 1969, I was dropped off at the college with my luggage. There was no Freshers' Week or orientation in those days. You just arrived and started. On the first Sunday that I was there was a knock on my door in the morning. The Oxford Intercollegiate Christian Union, which went by the name of OICU, had arranged that every incoming student who they knew came from a church had someone assigned to them. I've completely forgotten that person's name, but I can tell you that when that knock came on my door, I somehow knew that I was at a critical point, a decision point. Up to now, all my Christian activity was rooted in my family and my associations. At this point, I had to decide whether to accept the faith of my fathers as my own faith or not. No, you can't. Yes, we can. No, you can't. Yes, we can. Well, I opened the door, and I went with him to Headington Baptist Church and to OICU meetings, and learned an awful lot from people like John Johnson, who you've probably never heard of, but also from John Stott and Graham Greene and people like that who you probably have heard of. And I met a girl with long brown hair, but you'll have to talk to Rosemary about that one. But the reason I'm standing here today, I am convinced, is because I opened that door and said yes to that young man. And also because somebody cared enough to knock on the door. So, sir, I salute you for doing me such a favor. So here are three things that I think are important to successfully passing through a transition point. First, prayerfully acknowledge that this decision point is part of God's plan for your life and trust Him to guide you through. Get other Christians to help you. There is a tendency to think that we have to make all decisions alone. Do not fall for that one. It is your decision, but others can offer their wisdom. Second, make your faith an important part of the decision-making process, and also make sure that you attend to your faith in the same way that you attend to your housing, your clothes, and your food. If you are changing location, what are you doing about finding a new church that will help you grow? If you are changing schools, what Christian groups can you get involved in to help you grow? How are you going to transfer your Christian walk from one place to another? If you are changing jobs, how do your Christian finances work in the new position? I sometimes wonder whether people should spend as much time and energy picking a church as they do picking a place to live. Is your church home as important as your home? Third, choose your friends wisely. I was fortunate to find a group of friends who helped me grow in my Christian faith, but I know that it could have been otherwise. Finding friends who will help you grow rather than tear you down is vitally important. Could I tentatively suggest that Christian churches and Christian groups are good places to find such friends? My last point is that this church faces one of those decision points this morning. After the service, we're going to have a church meeting about calling a new senior pastor. There will doubtless be much discussion, and some will look to the future with fear, and some with hope. The future is never certain. In brethren circles, it's common to preface everything in the future with the phrase, if the Lord wills, or if you prefer the Latin, Deo volente. Acknowledge that the future is uncertain. The truth is that we do not know what the future holds, but we do know that God is faithful. Psalm 33. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the water of the sea into jars. He puts the deep into storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him, for he spoke and it came to be. He commanded and it stood firm. The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. And in Jeremiah 29, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. You will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I will be found by you. And by the way, that passage from Jeremiah was written to the Israelites after they'd messed up royally, been sent into exile. God is faithful, even when we are not. So, about the future of West End Baptist Church, God has a plan. Can't give you the details, but I know that there is a plan. I counted 49 names on the pastor's list of West End from 1890 to today. Rachel's is the last name on the list. Okay? And the story goes on. We've been up, we've been down, we've been burnt out, and we've been built up. But through all that time, God has been faithful to this church, and I am convinced that he will continue to be faithful from now into eternity. We all have decision points in our lives. May we all, young, old, and as a church, trust in our God who is faithful and in assurance that he desires our good. Amen.